tell me any history you know about the vessel and when and where she was built, that sort of thing.
Well, this uh, let me back up a little bit here. My
Yeah.
father was employed at Northern Machine and Marine Shipyard, which was right at the other end of Bar Harbor, and he was a foreman there for roughly 15 years. And after he quit in the roughly mid 60s, he began building this boat up on Baranof Avenue. The address where he built it was 3453 Baranof. And uh, I was just talking to him an hour ago, and he said that he hired Van and Des Moore. They had a kind of a construction company to transport the hull down to Bar Harbor on a lowboy. And they charged him $50 to do so. And the boat went into this stall and it got completed here and over on the beach behind Madison. And my father, it was launched. He started it in 1968. It was launched in 1973. And right in 1973 was when the limited entry came in. And he was not qualified for a permit because the requirement at that time was that you had to have derived, I think, 80% of your income from the fishery in question for the previous 10 years. And he had been working in the shipyard, not fishing. So he was walking down the street one day and he met a friend and he says, I don't know what I'm going to do. I just, brand new boat that he built for gill netting, and now he doesn't qualify for a permit. And that person said, oh, well, you should go talk to old Pete Klingenberg because the doctor just told him he had to quit fishing because of his heart. So my father went and visited old Pete, and Pete said, sure, you can have my permit. So my father filled out the paperwork for Pete, and Pete got the permit and transferred it to my father. And I think my father's first season gill netting was it was either 1974 or 1975, fishing down at Tree Point. And I think in 75, toward the end of the season, he went up and fished around Haines. And he must have done that in 74 because he said, I think 75 is when he installed the autopilot. He said, never again would he make that kind of a run without an autopilot. He was just telling me last night that first year he didn't have a radar or an autopilot. And he was setting up there out of Haines in the fog, and he got all the gear out and thought, boy, that was perfect timing, because he was just clear of somebody else's buoy just in front of the boat, and he kept staring at that buoy, and he figured out it was his buoy. He had just set in a big circle. And so he resolved at that point that he had to have a radar and he had to have an autopilot. When he was building the boat, it was on a complete shoestring. And at the time, Don Smothers owned Ketchikan Welding. And Don, my father didn't have any money to buy an engine, but he went and talked to Don, and Don fronted him the engine, which was a 453 Detroit. And my father installed that in the boat and went fishing and paid it off in full at the end of the fishing season. And my father fished the boat until 1989. And in 1989, he gave me the boat and permit, and I started fishing it in 1990, and continue to fish. So, and I do all the upkeep and maintenance on it, and it's still here and still floating, and it's a comfortable boat.
Yeah.
It's wood boats in general are much more comfortable than metal or glass. They're just not as cold. And so that's pretty much the... Oh, and the other thing I forgot was that after my father quit the shipyard, he worked briefly on the state ferries right when they were built, but didn't care for that. So he quit and went to work for Mike Homer at Totem Lumber. And that's where a lot of the lumber was sawn for this boat. This boat is mostly yellow cedar. The frames are white oak, and the stem is Australian gum, but all the planking and the deck beams and the wheelhouse are yellow cedar.